We'll call tonight's meeting of the Noblesville Common Council for Tuesday, May 15th, 2018 to order. If you would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Hampton, would you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Ayer?
Present.
Mr. Boyce?
Present.
Mr. Hampton?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. O'Connor? Ms. Rowland? Present. Mr. Taylor?
Present.
Ms. Wiles?
Present.
Mr. Jensen?
Present.
Mr. President, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Moving right along with our agenda this evening, first item is approval of the executive session memorandum from April 24th, 2018.
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Abstain.
7 and 1 abstention. Moving along, approval of the minutes from the April 24th, 2018 regular council meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? 8-0. Thank you very much. Moving on with tonight's approval of the agenda, Ms. Wiles.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that we postpone the proposed development item number 1 until our next meeting, and that would be proposed development project for the Midland Overlook
Yes,
Plan.
we've chosen to postpone it for 2 weeks. Yep, that's what the council's chosen to do. There we go. Any questions? Any other additions? We have a motion to approve as amended.
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded as amended. All those in favor? 8-0. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Boyce. Moving right along, petitions or comments by citizens who are present. Not seeing any forms. If you wish to speak at any time during tonight's meeting, you're welcome to. There are forms just outside the door there. Please fill those out and hand them up here to the clerk at any point in time. Moving on, Mayor's report to council. I know the mayor is out this week, but Deputy Mayor Steve Cook will hobble up here and give us a report.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Members of council, thank you very much. Yeah, the mayor's on a much-deserved vacation this week, so I'm happy to step in his place. Just a quick update on things that have been happening over the last couple of weeks. On May 2nd, Noblesville Youth Assistant Shining Stars Award dinner took place. They honored 10 kids from Noblesville schools, have had to overcome some challenging times personally and with their family, and they've been able to overcome and really show a great improvement in their schoolwork and in their attitude. So it was an exciting time to be there to celebrate the progress of our youth. On May 3rd, we had the Noblesville Prayer Breakfast in conjunction with National Day of Prayer, which was followed by a proclamation and a prayer on the square. On May 3rd, we welcomed Noblesville Methodist Preschool Art Show to City Hall, so hopefully you were able to come out and check that out. And on May 4th, we had the Riverview Health Foundation hosted its 14th annual Women of Vision Luncheon at NBC Suites. And on May 9th, we had the All-County Chamber Luncheon with a very robust panel discussion with the mayors from 4 of our cities here in Hamilton County. And on May 12th, as you all know, you were here for the council work session where we discussed the capital improvement project. So thank you very much for your attendance. Coming up next, in the next couple of weeks, on May 21st, we have the youth assistants from all of the chapters within the county are going to be meeting here in City Hall, along with Senator Victoria Sparks. On May 22nd, we have the Noblesville Touch-Shaped Truck event at City Hall. It's going to take place from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock. It's all part of National Public Works Week. We're going to have vehicles out there from street department, engineering, wastewater, and I think a wreck-to-go van as well. So we're inviting all the public, including children, to come on out and touch a truck. And on May 28th, of course, City Hall will be closed for Memorial Day before we regroup again on May 29th for our next council meeting. Any questions?
Questions of Mr. Cook? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. Moving along to council committee reports. Mr. Ayer?
Roads Committee met on May 4th. Myself, Mr. Hampton, Mr. Jensen, Mr. O'Connor were present, along with Clark Evelyn Lees, Engineer John Berry, and the Street Commissioner Patty Johnson. East-West Corridor project along Pleasant Street, we're still working on funding mechanisms for that. There'll be some additional information put up on the website regarding Pleasant Street extension in the near future. Midland Trace, the project is on schedule and on budget. Phase 2 should be completed by October. 2018 resurfacing and sidewalk program, repaving on Greenfield Avenue is progressing well, and I think it's probably done. At least it was darn close when I was down there last week. 171st Street is complete, and they're working on some early action to take care of some bad bumps on the brick streets. The 2018 street rehabilitation contract will be awarded this morning, I think, at the Board of Works. Riverwalk design's complete. They're identifying some funding sources. Levee Trail design's complete. Little Chicago Road Trail, they've seeded and all the seed washed out, so they will be reseeding and probably have since we haven't had rain. State Road 37, the design work continues. Harriman Boulevard, the southern third's complete, and there's negotiation for the third north of that, and it should be complete by the end of the year. Oleo Road we talked about in the meeting we were in last weekend. Logan Street pedestrian bridge is still on track. The county's going to bid that out next month, and it should start this year. And I believe that's it, unless anyone has any questions.
Questions for Mr. Ayer? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Ayer. Additional council committee reports? Ms. Rowland?
I do.
Ms. Wiles?
So I have the Finance Committee met on Thursday, May 10th. Mr. O'Connor, myself, Mr. Hampton, and Mr. Johnson participated, along with Evelyn Lees and Jeff Spalding and Heather Trexler from staff. Mr. Spalding will be talking with us later on this evening about some investments of city funds. We also talked and had a presentation from William Sheldrake, President of Policy Analytics, LLC. They've done a lot of work for Indianapolis and Fishers and other growing communities. And what they are proposing to us is to do an evaluation of our different TIF districts and to be able to give us cash flow projections, analysis, and create maps for each of those different TIF districts. And then the second phase will be using that data to show how it impacts overlapping tax districts such as schools. So we were very much in favor of that, and my understanding is the Board of Public Works approved that contract this morning. So they should begin work on that immediately, which is wonderful. The comprehensive annual financial report is underway, or the CAFRA, and I know Mr. Jensen and Mr. Spalding participated with a meeting with the State Board of Accounts, so that's ongoing, and the claims come to you with a recommendation from the Finance Committee.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions from Ms. Wiles? Additional council committee reports? Ms. Rowland?
I met with the Noblesville Arts Council as the liaison for the Noblesville City Council. It was on May 2nd, and that is the second meeting this year. It was well attended, with lots and lots of ideas of non-for-profits and different arts projects that are going on. And the idea is to coordinate these, to enhance them as other people join in on and partner in projects for the community. We did a visioning and collaboration at that meeting. Consideration, discussion on the boundaries of the Arts District, event planning, nightlife, quality art, public art, artist workplaces and workspaces, festivals, encouraging enthusiasm and pride in history, and working with churches and volunteers and connecting people and apprenticeships, promoting a unified look, unified efforts. Growing the local economy through the arts was also an important discussion. Tools for the community, problem solving. It was a long, involved, really, it was a total community visioning based on the arts. There is a survey that the Arts Council has out, and it's fairly involved, and I think if you Google Noblesville Arts Council, you can find that survey and have a lot of personal input on that. The next meeting is August the 8th. One note, I think it's very important to coordinate the discussion of the Arts Council into the Downtown Embrace Noblesville plan. Our downtown is the district and more larger boundaries than just the downtown, but it does coordinate, and I think they're trying very hard to address a myriad of issues, and I think we need to rein them in just a little bit as it connects to our downtown additional opportunities for design, and the Arts District should be very involved in that.
Questions of Ms. Rowland? Thank you for that report. Additional council committee reports. Seeing none, moving on to the approval of claims. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? 8-0. Thank you very much. Moving right along to previously discussed ordinances. Ordinance 09-04-18. Council to consider ordinance 09-04-18, an ordinance concerning the vacation of streets, right-of-way, and infrastructure for SMC Boulevard and Douglas Floyd Parkway, east of Edgar Way. Mr. Beery.
Good evening. The public hearing tonight, just to give you background, that is set to discuss vacation of Douglas Floyd Parkway and SMC Boulevard east of Edgar Way to accommodate the expansion of SMC and for the construction of the new facility. Vacation will include all right-of-way, including any utilities that are within the existing right-of-way. Those will be removed and or addressed and abandoned at the proposed owner's cost. So when and if said vacation happens, the utilities will go along with the property.
Thank you, Mr. Beery. Any questions of Mr. Beery? Seeing none, we'll open the public hearing for ordinance 09-04-18.
Mr. President,
Ms. Wiles?
seeing no one come forward for the public hearing, I would make a motion that we close the public hearing.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? 8-0. With that, any additional comments?
Sorry.
That's all right. I gotcha.
Thank you.
Additional comments? Seeing none, we have a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Ms. Rowland. Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
8-0, the ordinance is approved.
Very much. Moving right along, ordinance 10-04-18. Council to consider ordinance 10-04-18, an ordinance updating section 7 of chapter 78, traffic schedules in the City of Noblesville Code of Ordinances. Mr. Beery.
Good evening. Before you are two amendments to the city's traffic code. I don't remember the specific schedules, but I remember the items. The first item is conversion of a two-way stop to a four-way stop at 156th Street and Summer Road. Traffic patterns in that area warrant change in traffic control. There's some off-balance movements there. Also, the city will be we'll be resurfacing Summer Road this year as soon as we get back funds, funds and agreements from individual developers along the road. So this will coincide, the four-way stop will coincide with other improvements that are planned and outstanding along that stretch of roadway. The other request is to do some cleanup from original platting and dedication. Cumberland Point Boulevard, at the entrance to Cumberland Point Boulevard, as long as Endeavor Drive, will be marked as no parking. Typically in city, we indicate on certain thoroughfare streets that have higher operational levels, as well as major entrances to subdivisions and commercial drives are designated as no parking, because typically those areas have heavy truck movements, and businesses and commercial parks are usually typically have separate parking requirements than what normal residential streets do. So we recommend that those changes be made to the individual traffic codes.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. Additional questions of Mr. Berry, Mr. Ayer?
Mr. Berry, are there any changes to the 166th Street in Summer that's just going to maintain a stop going at just a one-way stop but going south?
That's correct. Traffic counts right now. I can't speak for post-development. We typically go in and do counts and studies once we hit either both 50% build out of subdivisions and then final build out. We'll do post studies. At this time, there's no change warranted. 166th Street still kind of dominates the counts at this time, the through traffic out there.
Thank you.
Additional question, Mr. Berry? Seeing none, do I hear a motion to approve ordinance 10-04-18?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Ayer?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Ms. Rowland?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Jensen?
Aye.
8-0, the ordinance is approved.
Thank you.
Right along. Ordinance 13-04-18. Council to consider ordinance 13-04-18. An ordinance amending ordinances 22-03-6 and 65-07-89 concerning the Noblesville parking ordinance. Chief Jowett, thank you for being here.
Good evening. Jonathan Mays, our attorney from Bose, McKinney & Evans, is with us tonight also so that we can answer any questions you might have. But we're asking that the council approve ordinance 13-04-18, which contains some, we believe, necessary adjustments and updates to our parking enforcement system.
Questions of Chief Jowett? Seeing none, thank you very much. Do we have a motion to approve ordinance 13-04-18?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Ayer?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Ms. Rowland? Mr. Taylor?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Jensen?
Aye.
8-0, the ordinance is approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Moving right along with proposed development presentations. We'll skip to number 2 since number 1 was postponed. Council to consider introductory information for the Timbers Plan development regarding amendments to the adopted preliminary development agreement. Good evening, Ms. Yelton.
Good evening. This item before you is a proposed amendment to an adopted ordinance that was adopted approximately 1 year ago. Again, as you may recall, this property is located basically north of State Road 38 and east of Little Chicago Road. It was a piece of property that contained both residential and commercial uses. As you may recall, when we originally looked at this plan, it was a layout that included all the, I'm going to say, residential portion. The commercial portion of that development, at the time it was to be developed, would have to come back for council approval, although we did rezone the underlying part of it to commercial. The overall plan contained 3 different areas as far as lot sizes go and housing types. Their proposed plan, also there would have been a second entrance basically in regards to the commercial portion of this. You don't see it on this plan because at the time the commercial portion would have come back, they would have shown that additional entrance. So when they're saying that they're reducing the number of entrances along State Road 38, they are reducing it from 2 down to 1. The new entrance location will be more centered between what would have been kind of the 2 proposed entrances. The other thing is that they're updating some of the layout. Some of the lots in some of the areas were basically in the floodplain, and what they have done is basically taken those lots out of the floodplain area, which is obviously a good thing. And I believe some of their lot counts in here, lot counts have not exceeded the 310 lots total that they could develop But I think some of the shift, there has been some shift between the number of, I'm going to say 52 size lots and 65 size lots. The lots that were the 92 have all remained as the number previously approved. And with that, I will ask if you have any questions of staff. If not, I know Steve Harden is here, I believe, to make the presentation.
Staff? Question, you have a question, staff? Mr.
Ms. Sheldon, could you bring the previous photo up?
That one.
At the time this came in, that entrance lined up with the, what's the name of it?
No
Grove subdivision. And now it's going to be shifted south, so we're not going to have a line up there for any potential future traffic light roundabout or whatever the state may deem.
Well, that would be correct. If this plan, the new plan gets adopted, then that is correct. This will not align with what's directly across the street.
Have further questions?
Not right now.
Okay. Mr. Harden?
Mr. President?
Mr. Johnson?
Quick question.
Sure.
Mr. Beery, is that a good thing or a bad thing that they don't align?
I don't really know that I have an opinion on that one way or another.
Okay.
And I think Brian's point's valid that
Harden?
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the City Council. For the record, my name is Steve Harden. I'm a partner in the law firm of Faegre Baker Daniels, so I'm pleased to be here representing Drees Homes on their update for you. With me from Drees Homes is Don Barnett and Michael Franciscani, and from our law firm, Sam Swafford is here with me. As Joyce Ann mentioned, and as we submitted in our materials that we provided you, since the PUD was approved originally, they've dug into the detailed engineering and have further defined the limits of where the floodplain is, where the wetlands are. Been proceeding forward with the Department of the Army Corps of Engineers, the NDOT, and I believe NDOT has, from this point, has approved the location of the new entrance. So that's an NDOT right-of-way, so they've had to work through that. I'll just highlight for you some of the differences of where we are, and all of these are driven by just the updated detailed engineering as we went through final design. None of the standards in the PUD ordinance are being changed or proposed to be changed at all. It's just, these are just design elements. So probably the main thing is that as they dug into the design, this turns out to be about the widest area for where the floodplain, the creek, and there's a bend in it that would cause the spanning to be more significant. And so by relocating it to here, this was also the most efficient location for that entrance. And then it also provided the ability to have, as we described before, the neighborhood retail area to be really integrated within the neighborhood. So the one entrance coming in off of 38 to serve both that neighborhood retail area and the neighborhood. Another thing that Joyce Ann mentioned was as they went through and detailed the limits of the floodplain in this area, it was wider than had been originally anticipated, so they had to push these lots, went back this way to the east a little bit. They found in some areas there was more wetlands and more floodplain. In other areas there was less. So there's a variety of different changes because of that. One of the other changes was with the more developed engineering data, this pond here, it was deemed to be appropriate to be able to create two ponds where there was one because of the topography. So that was one of the changes as well. This area along the frontage along Little Chicago Road originally had, I think there was about 11 lots here backing up to Little Chicago. It was determined as they went through the more detailed engineering that due to some wetlands in this area, we needed to reduce back the number of lots that are backing up along Little Chicago. So that's a difference that you'll see there as well. And then in this area, it was anticipated that this was an unbuildable area before, but now they're able to develop into this area, so that was shifted in that area as well. There's a variety of different things, but again, none of the development standards are being changed. It's moving the final design a little bit here and there because of mostly what was found through the delineation for wetlands and floodplain. And working with the other agencies. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, but we're here for the introduction and then take any advice and comments you have and go to the Plan Commission, hopefully be back in front of you and be ready to start some development later. Thank you very much.
Questions or comments from Mr. Harden? Mr. Ayer?
Mr. Harden, basically the change is based on the cost of putting the bridge in or spanning the creek.
For where the entrance is?
Right.
That's a big part of it, absolutely, sure.
And do you know what the square footage drop on those lots is? I'm assuming you wouldn't be building back in that floodplain anyway, even if they were included in there. Does that, the pictures don't really tell me anything. Are we 92 foot by 50 foot? Are we 92 foot by 40 or 92 by,
Sure.
Just a rough, they're not all going to be the same, I assume.
So the minimum for the 92-foot wide lots is 13,800 square feet.
I have a question for Mr. Berry, so I'm not this time.
Mr. Boyce?
Mr. Arden, so I get that we were going to have the original cut and then the one for the commercial. Now that we're moving that original cut, will that work for the commercial and the residential, or that there's still going to be two?
No.
So now there will just be one?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hampton?
When we went through this the first time, when there was a lot of talk about the basically.
Mr. Hampton, can you lean up and use your
I'm sorry.
microphone? That's all right.
There was a tree that was saved the first time through. None of that is good. The ordinance itself is not changing along that lot line, correct?
That's correct. We're not changing any standards.
The yards are changing, the cul-de-sac is changing, but it doesn't affect that boundary.
That's correct. I just want to have just a moment to be able to, I didn't look back to see if there was anything special about that language you're referencing, so let me just double check that.
I'm going to have to look back too.
Yeah.
It's been a year.
I don't believe it. It appears in that area, the concept plan is not changing, but I know, I remember what you're talking about. Let me double check that before I say something.
Without seeing the ordinance in front of us, the commercial uses haven't changed either.
Nope.
That may be, okay, I see her shaking her head.
No, we're not at all. No, there's not a word in the ordinance that's being changed. It's only the development plan.
Ms. Rowland, did you have a comment?
My question is on the Little Chicago Road section. I'm assuming the brown area is the commercial that's on to Little Chicago?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't see a road. Where is it?
So here's the original concept plan, which didn't show where the cut was. We didn't have we didn't have a development plan for that yet. So that's when Joyce Ann mentioned that would come back in.
Still don't.
That's correct, yeah. We're not coming back in because we're ready to go with the commercial.
Okay.
We're coming back because we're ready to develop the residential part.
So we got the alignment on State Road 38 just because you moved the road and it backs up to...
That's correct.
Are you going to be that clever on the Little Chicago? Or are we going to are you anticipating two cuts or?
I appreciate your optimism. I don't think so. I think the commercial on Little Chicago will have its own curb cut, and that'll be reviewed by city engineering and planning whenever they get ready for that, how many that would be. Thank you.
Mr. Hearn, I'll just make a comment more than a question. I do have I was supportive of this project before, but we've talked a lot recently about State Road 38 and that corridor in terms of traffic, and even State Road 32. We're fortunate to have great state arteries, but they're becoming a little bit tricky in terms of traffic. Especially 38 has some intersections. Mr. Hampton's nodding because he represents the northern tier, and this is actually in his district. But there's some intersection issues there, and I do have some concerns about taking the alignment away from Mill Grove and moving it to the northwest, simply because of the safety in terms of long-term coordination with NDOT. I think that just makes it that much more complex in terms of traffic exit and entrance off of 38. So that's a comment and fear that I have going forward with this project. Again, I'm supportive. I like the concept. I think it fits with our housing study, but we talked at nauseum about before, but I do have some concerns about those entrances the entrance being moved.
I was clear before that Dries did, before we came here, they've submitted that to NDOT.
I heard you loud and clear on that,
Yep.
Absolutely. This is more of an internal concern in me, so.
It's a fair question, and we'll make sure that we've addressed it.
Yeah, thanks, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Additional comments or questions? Mr. Ayer?
I suppose this Harden or Mr. Berry. So you're going to be, this is Drees project, correct?
That's correct.
And are they going to be the developer?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so they will be responsible for all the utility work that's going to go into the projects, drainage, sewage.
That's correct, sir.
The city of Noblesville is not going to contribute any money to that?
There are discussions about the city partnering with Drees for an oversized interceptor, if that's what you're asking about. Anything internal to the development.
Anything internal to the development is what I'm.
Other than the potential agreement on doing the oversized interceptor, no, the city's, not that I'm aware of, would be doing.
No, if it was going to be something oversized to service something else.
That's correct.
Down the line, then the city.
That's certainly potential, that's correct.
Okay. Barry, see here? There he is, I'm sorry. You moved and you're playing musical. You have anything you can add onto this?
Yeah.
Excuse me, John.
Firstly, this was, I think, the first project that was approved through preliminary reading or hearing. I think it was the first project to come through that. Since then, they have struggled with some financial issues with the original layout. They've been working about 1.5 years trying to work the issues out. The last we were informed, we're still reviewing the project. They filed for TAC, so the timing with this meeting and the TAC meeting didn't kind of work out in comment development, so we're still kind of looking, developing final comment letters on things that will be ready for Thursday's meeting. Usually NDOT lets us know or contacts us regarding cuts on state routes for subdivisions. The commercial cut wasn't really shown connecting to the street. I'll just note that right there. There were some financial issues associated in a balance with tree clearing issues originally, and that was part of the changes. There are sewer depth issues associated with creek crossings as well that they were having financial trouble meeting too. I'm not sure how comments are going to shake out or anything like that. I can't commit that we are going to have money to contribute just due to the time lapse and the time lag. They've been communicated that in the time they've been trying to redesign the project. So, I mean, after that first approval, they've kind of struggled with things, trying to make things work after the fact because there were some misses in that original preliminary plot plan. So we're kind of working on it. I don't have an answer to commercial drives on Little Chicago Road. I wasn't prepared to answer or address any issues or questions tonight, so I was unprepared for that. But from that drawing, it did not look like they were connecting to that connector street. If I had my money dealing with these, that commercial lot's going to expect some type of access to State Road 38. Just knowing what I've dealt with in the past, I would say if you want to protect against that, you need to protect that against that as a council because the permit would be issued with NDOT contrary to what your wishes would be anyway. So I don't know. It's still got a lot of hurdles. There were a lot of mulligans needed in this one to make it work. We don't know if we can make the financials work. The last I had heard when we tried to, work out numbers for an agreement, we were still too far apart on making the numbers work on the oversizing agreement because again, the added depth of the sewers that they didn't anticipate to tap into the sewer main if we would install it. There were also concerns with wetlands and some other issues with tree clearing whenever we were doing the project. We made an attempt to kind of reroute the sewer at our additional cost to accommodate that, but it looked like on that plot plan they're doing additional tree clearing. That was not quantifiable. We actually had better numbers than they did when we were talking about tree clearing on the site. So, I apologize. I can't answer a lot of the questions that you had tonight, but that's the information I have.
But they are coming in front of TAC, and you'll have some answers.
Yeah, we do have
hit the plan commission.
TAC's on Thursday.
Yeah, so a lot of these will be addressed before it would get to plan commission or get back to us.
Right.
Time to figure out whether the city can participate or not participate. And I appreciate it.
Doesn't matter to me.
Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Berry, is there any kind of concrete plan for widening Little Chicago Road further north than where it is right now? And what is that timeline, if so? Or?
That would all be funding dependent, and we don't have any funds identified for that. I believe when we did estimates, we've submitted for that road project on a couple of MPO projects. I'm just going to spit this off at the top of my head. Usually I'm better at not bad at remembering numbers off the top of my head. Again, I wasn't prepared for that. I thought that number was in the $15 to $16 million range to, expand Little Chicago north of 38.
That to expand it all the way up to the bridge, or?
Yeah, that would have gotten it all the way to the bridge.
Boyce?
I would echo a little bit of what you said, Mr. Jensen. I like the fact that there would only be one cut going into 38, but it does worry me when we just were talking on Saturday about Whitcomb Ridge. I'm sure when they first put in Whitcomb Ridge, they never would have thought they needed a roundabout there in front of it, and that will work for 2 additions. And if we were to move this one down the road a little ways, then that would become impossible. And I know that's a long ways down the road, but I'm sure when they first put in Whitcomb Ridge, they never thought they'd need that then. So it just does concern me, and that's something I think we need to think about, Mr. Berry, too.
I apologize for not having a lot of the answers. I will tell you, some of the staff's been working on this. We've spent more time on this project probably in the last year than we have on some of our capital projects, our own in-house projects.
Yeah. No, I'm not asking for an answer right now, just something to kind of think about, because that was something that was brought up on Saturday.
Ms. Rowland?
This is a comment I've made before, but I'd like to make it again, because now we're getting down the nitty-gritty and things start becoming clearer. I think this is a beautiful project, actually. I like many of the things. The concept is right on. It's the commercial that really makes me worry. And it's also complicated because of what's across the street, additional commercial. So I just don't see how that's all going to work on that corner with multiple cuts and different things going on. And I just think we have to be really careful on the commercial part that sits with these beautiful housing projects. And my vision is that one day State Road 38 will be housing, commercial will look like one big long strip mall, and people trying to navigate that 100 different ways. So I just think the commercial complicates it a great deal, and I know the argument is the neighborhood wants commercial, but it can't meet all needs of a neighborhood. They're small, they're specialty kinds of ideas, and usually based on South Harbor, which has been struggling for 100 years and now has a filling station. And oh my gosh, the city attorney is shaking his head yes. It really gets complicated, it seems to me, and I think it detracts from a really, really nice living environment to have the commercial. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Ms. Wall, Mr. Hampton.
But just to follow up on that, one thing that we did do with this when we approved it the first time, and why I asked the question about the approved uses, is gas stations will not be allowed to go there. That we stopped that. So that, and the other side of the commercial, Mrs. Rowland, is the idea behind when we were talking about this before, that might be a little bar and grill, or it might be a laundromat or something where they can go down and do some things and connect from that community. That was kind of the idea behind it. I see I wouldn't call it a vision, I'd call it a nightmare a little bit, what you were saying. But I think and that's why we have to control what commercial goes in there, if we can, to a point, by restricting certain kinds, and that's why we can control it and make it a nice community. I do have a real problem, and we'll say again, about the whole 38 corridor, and this does alarm me, not being aligned with Mill Creek there, Mill Grove. Yeah.
Mr. Hampton, Mr. Taylor.
I just want to echo, excuse me, echo what other council members up here said. That alignment really worries me. May not be a big deal now, but in the future, I see that being a problem.
Mr. Johnson.
This ties back to my earlier question about Little Chicago Road, and it's probably more for Stephen than it is for John Berry, but the northern, or the entrance on the side of Little Chicago Road, actually I believe, Steve, is north of where it is wider, so I think it narrows down there. Are we thinking about, if you're going south on Little Chicago, a left turn lane into it, or if you're going north on Little Chicago, a right turn blister or something like that?
Okay. They've got the plan, I believe those plans are being developed and should be being reviewed right now. I don't have the answer right now, but
Yeah.
we'll have that and communicate that back to Joyce Ann, and she can let
The only thing I
everybody
was
know.
thinking about going south is that you could get a backup of people trying to turn left into there, if there's not a left turn lane, that keeps traffic from going on down to the stoplight to get to 38 and that area.
And when we had, if I remember right, Mr. Johnson, we had the traffic study that was done that came back with recommendations specifically for each of those different intersections and had whether they were A-cell, D-cell, and/or passing blisters. So we'll refresh our recollection and communicate that back to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Wallace?
I'll just echo other comments that have been made, that I'm concerned about the alignment and all the discussions we've had along State Road 38. We want to make sure that we are planning.
Additional feedback or comments? Seeing none.
Thank you very
sir.
much.
Appreciate it, Mr.
Appreciate
Harden.
it. Give us good homework.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Moving right along, new ordinances for discussion. Ordinance 14-05-18. Council to consider ordinance 14-05-18, an ordinance amending ordinance 76-09-06 for Cumberland Farms Plan Development at 2133-9 State Road 19.
Motion to introduce?
Second.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ashelman.
As Mr. Ayer pointed out the other day, this property is about as far north as you can get and still be within our planning and zoning jurisdiction. This is the approximate line of 216th Street. So the property we're talking about is Lot 1, Cumberland Farms Industrial Park. The original park was developed in, the plan development ordinance was approved in October 2006 and permitted a variety of commercial and industrial office uses. And they accessed off an internal street. And this is Lot 1. This is the internal drive, and it currently exists in this condition. The petitioner began constructing a building for fluid waste services, and they received a certificate of occupancy in February of 2017. What they found as they were doing that is they needed to ask for relief from the landscaping required by the Unified Development Ordinance. Their current PD ordinance referred to the UDO for a lot of their requirements, and as they got closer to a certificate of occupancy, they had modified, so the plan that's currently on the screen is their approved landscape plan. They modified that plan and needed to ask for relief from 4 sections of the UDO. So what these colors indicate is the areas where they're asking for the different types of relief. So each color indicates a section of the ordinance that they're asking for relief from. So the red area along State Road 19, I've done that 3 times today. State Road 19, the Unified Development Ordinance requires that they do a tree and shrub planting along the entire length of the yard. What they've shown is they're just showing a shrub planting along the length of their parking lot. And what they're asking to do on the northern portion of the lot is actually, these trees here are evergreen trees. They will serve the purpose of both the shrubs and the shade trees. It's just our ordinance doesn't allow that type of substitution. So if they're going to do it, they have to call it out in their ordinance to start with. Another place they're asking for relief from the shrub requirements is on the southern part of their parking lot across from their overhead doors and on this east and north side of their parking lot. And this is actually an older plan. The new plan that they've proposed, actually, these are evergreen trees. They're shifting over to this location so that as you're driving on State Road 19 northbound, it will give you some screening properties from those overhead doors. Currently, All this ground back here is, to the east of the property is vacant, and the petitioner owns it. The third thing they're asking for relief from is the interior parking lot requirements, so you can see these pink squares. The UDO requires that any parking row 100 feet or more have a parking island in it. It also requires that all parking rows be terminated at each end with a parking island, and those parking islands have to have at least 1 tree and 5 shrubs planted in them. In this instance, they showed an island here. It actually was not installed. They've striped the area off, but the island's not installed. And then these other 3 locations, they've installed trees, but they're not showing any shrub installation in them. And then the last item is relief from the building-based landscape requirement. So our ordinance currently requires that they do a 10-foot strip around the entire building in building-based landscape area. So we generally will calculate that area and then ensure that they've installed that around the portions of their building. As they got through the construction stage, there's about 2,100 square feet of building-based landscape area that they had shown on their plans on this east and southeast side of their building. During construction, they did not install that. They installed a concrete apron to allow a wider area for their trucks to go around to the back of the property. So the reductions required. This does come to you with a 8-0 favorable recommendation from the Plan Commission for adoption.
Thank you, Ms. Ashman. Additional questions for Denise?
Real quickly, Mr. President. The islands, what was, I missed, what's going in there? Are those just going away completely, or?
So the one here is completely gone. It's just striped. The ones on the ends of the parking rows are there, but they have no shrubs in them, so they don't meet the requirements for the interior parking lot landscaping.
Thank you.
Questions? Ms. Rowland?
Remind me what else is around here.
There is a self-storage facility that is directly north of this property. It was built, they've built a couple new buildings since I started, but it was primarily built in the late 90s, 1980s, 1990s. There's a vacant property south of this that's part of this Cumberland Farms Industrial Park. And then most of you may know it as the Bolden Building. Kurt Bolden built a industrial building. It was 2-story. I think he intended for it to be a business storage location where he could, it had a bunch of overhead doors and they could divide it up and store their stuff there. It's since sold, but it keeps kind of the same use. There are a couple residences scattered on the west side of 19, but directly across the street from this, I believe, is actually a Vectren pipeline station where it daylights. So, and there is a house, but it's kind of cat-a-corner from this.
Mr. Boyce?
I was just going to say, I mean, some of the stuff where that's going north and south of this building, I certainly don't know that there's a big deal at all. I do think this is one of our entrances to the city that is lacking quite a bit. With the Vectren right across the street, I'm not sure how much we can do here, but it is something that I'd like the city to look at in the future because it certainly is not one of our best gateways coming in from Cicero and Tipton. Doesn't present a really good face to our community, I don't believe.
Additional comments or questions? Seeing none, see you in a few weeks.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ayer.
I'd like to call Mr. Berry back up for just a minute to talk to me about this ordinance that we have approved regarding a couple of sections that were in the ordinance. The 166 that we talked about and the Greenfield Avenue. Can you
I
clarify that.
apologize for that. That was an oversight, and normally I'm better at speaking off the top of my head. 166th Street is on there, 166th Street and Summer Road is on there, as well as Summer Road and Greenfield, because the city took those into our inventory, and we do not have stop signs at those intersections in our ordinance the way they are presently signed. So I checked that whole corridor, and seeing there was no ordinance establishing which street should stop for which, and there's no control established, I added those two in there just to clean them up. There's no change, it's just making the stop sign a part of the ordinance. We have an intern that's going to come in the summer and try to balance up all of our stop streets and all of that stuff to clean everything up. So whenever we do these, I try to check the whole corridor, and I wish I would have explained that better, but I forgot those two stop signs were on there. There's no change, they're just not in our ordinance now. This puts them in there.
That's why I was just kind of curious. I've stopped at that stop sign a couple of times, and I was just wondering what the, yeah, I guess I didn't. I appreciate it. Thank you for clearing that up.
Thank you. Moving along, new ordinance 15-05-18, council to consider ordinance 15-05-18, an ordinance regarding a special consideration for the construction of a church in the Cumberland Point Plan Development at 10005 Cumberland Point Boulevard.
Motion to introduce.
Second.
Thank you very much. Ms. Yelton.
Good evening again. The item before you again is a proposal to allow a church in an industrial area, which is actually a part of our corporate campus, which actually has an additional overlay of the Cumberland Point plan development. The proposal was given approval to move forward from the Plan Commission by a 7-0-1 abstention vote at our last meeting. Again, it's a special consideration, and by our definition, a special consideration is a use that requires specific approval by the Plan Commission and the Council because of its unique or unusual nature of the project. Again, churches within the UDO are basically special considerations or conditional uses that would go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So we don't get that request very often before the Plan Commission and the Council, but this just happens to be one of those areas. Again, the surrounding land uses to this property include east, there's single-family dwellings, south we have an industrial park, west it's industrial, north there's multifamily dwellings. Most of this area that was developed, including the single-family, the industrial uses within this development, as well as the apartments north, are all a part of the Cumberland Point Plan Development Ordinance. So when that came to us back in 2002, it was basically a mixed-use development at that time. Again, some of the specific uses in the area include the Options Charter School, which is directly to the west of this. You also have Realize, which is a prototyping they do prototyping there. You have American Feeding, again, which designs and builds feeders. You have a new building that basically has just recently got approval. They haven't broken ground yet, but it's TMG, and that's a contractor's office. And obviously in that immediate area, there are many storage warehouse units. This particular lot is located at the very entrance of this subdivision at Cumberland Point Boulevard and Endeavor Drive. The applicant has submitted a preliminary plan, which you see here. We did have a few people speak at the Plan Commission meeting. I'm going to pass out to you something that I just received late this evening. I've already given Evelyn her copy. But it's an email from one of the gentlemen that spoke at that meeting, and in a nutshell basically says that even at the meeting and even after the meeting, communication with the proposed church group has been great, and they have basically addressed a lot of the comments. One of the things that we did talk about, our ordinance requires that parking is based on basically roughly 4 per 1,000 is what it ends up being. So in other words, they've got basically 25 parking spaces, which they have had to provide, which they do show on the lot. There was some concern about, you know, if you have a sanctuary for 100 people, that not everybody would come, 3 or 4 in a vehicle. They have agreed to basically provide some additional parking. Our city engineer, John Berry, basically did some research for us, basically by parking standards that, you know, are standards throughout. And we've come up with a number of basically 37 additional parking spaces. We have given them the opportunity to either provide those additional 37 spaces on the lot, or they can get a shared parking agreement with some of the surrounding businesses, because obviously their time of using the parking lot is not going to be the same time as the surrounding uses. So we've kind of left that up to them to figure out between now and when they actually come back to us with a detailed development plan. They also did submit basically elevations of the church. I will say, basically looking at these elevations, it does meet the standards that are within the specific ordinance. Again, the Plan Commission did send this to you with a favorable recommendation for adoption. The other item that we discussed at the meeting was what we call payments in lieu of taxes. That is a pilot ordinance that basically helps provide payments to the debt service. And that is going to have to be worked out between now and the next time it comes back to you guys for basically final approval.
Ms. Yelton, could you square me away real quick on where, is this entrance on Endeavor Drive, or will they enter off of Cumberland?
No, their entrance will actually, to this site, is actually off of Endeavor Drive. They will not have a cut off of Cumberland Point Boulevard.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's that first lot as you come south on Endeavor Drive from
Yes.
Cumberland Point, correct? Okay.
Yes.
Turn right and turn left.
Got it. Okay.
Yes.
That's what I thought. I just had to get my bearings straight there for a second. Additional questions for Ms. Yelton? People are pointing at each other. Who wants to talk?
Well,
Do you want to talk?
yeah, on the payment in lieu of taxes agreement, if you recall in 2016, some of you were here, but this is in the TIF district that supported the construction of 146th Street, Cumberland Road, and all the other improvements were there. And we spent quite a bit of time putting together a requirement that if any tax exempt use went in there, that they would pay payments in lieu of taxes. I got the file out, but I haven't called Mr. Byers for an appointment, but we'll be able to work through that, I'm sure, before the next meeting. And that's why we did that. It was our requirement, because we have debt service on the TIF, but for the expenditure of those funds, this would still be a cornfield with no access to anywhere. So it is a fair trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Mr. Johnson, do you?
No, that was just pointing out.
Additional comments? I do appreciate the HOA meeting with the church too. That's always a concern. I'm glad that's a great example of people talking to one another. So.
And like I said, the individuals that came and spoke at the Plan Commission, I don't know that anybody was really upset about it. You know, they just had some concerns. Even at the Plan Commission meeting, the church kind of reached out there and said they were more than willing to sit down and have a discussion with them. I did receive one note of correspondence. This was prior to the Plan Commission, from someone that lives on the next street. I don't know exactly where because she didn't leave an address, but she lives on the east side of Harmon Place, and which is not directly adjacent to this property, but she was against the use of a church. But she was the only one that we heard from. She did not attend the Plan Commission meeting. She simply just sent correspondence. And like I said, everybody else that was at the Plan Commission meeting was not against this proposal, just has some concerns that I believe the church has basically reached out to try to address.
Thank you very much. Does Mr. Byers want to speak on this?
Sure. Mr. President, members of the council, Gordon Byers, I'll be brief. I'll show you a few pictures. This is the Stony Creek Church of Christ. There's the location. It's in Lot 1. Apartments to the north, single family northeast, single family east, enclosed industrial south, school to the west. to give you the big perspective. A little glare, we're right in here. So you can see we've got enough infrastructure, and I think, you might ask, a church use is a conditional use. It's allowed throughout most of Noblesville. We all know historically zoning residential, you put churches, it's a conditional use. In this particular location, it picks up this special consideration. And the only other thing I'd point out, this ordinance that it's in, this PUD ordinance, Cumberland Road Point PUD, we've done amendments to mini warehouse, indoor rec facility, a school, and a personal service business. So we've done some deviation. I think this is an appropriate use. You might ask, well, why is this church? This church is sort of a growing non-denominational church. Sanctuary holds 100. The ministers here, they're currently conducting service in the library, I think, of Ivy Tech. They picked the name Stony Creek because of its presence in Hamilton County, and they're trying to create a church. We think this is the appropriate location. We addressed, and the issue that came up, the ordinance required 100, for a 100-person sanctuary required 25 parking spaces, but I think everyone sort of said, well, maybe our ordinance is a little off. So we've land banked, or we've created 37 on site. So this drawing here that we submitted to planning has 37, which is more than, I think, adequate. This is the kind of church I sort of want to check to make sure I'm grounded here before I talk about these things. In case of lightning, this is a church that doesn't have activities 24/7. They have Sunday service, and they'll have a Bible study one other time. So it's not a high-intensity type church where there's constant activity. And it's a scale, I think it works in this location. You might ask, why are they going here? I would respectfully submit, perhaps Mr. Ayers can add, that, Noblesville's a growing community, and to find locations like we used to in the old days, 5 acres off of a farm where someone could put a church in and get a favorable deal, those days are gone. So to bring a church into this area and try to create one requires to go into these types of areas where there's infrastructure, roads, stormwater detention, and those type of things. They accept they understand the pilot agreement. We've gone through that. Mr. Howard's delaying the meeting because he's going to put on some rubber shoes and make sure he's got a real good grounding before we talk about the pilot agreement. But they accept that, and I think they'll be a good quality neighbor. If you have any questions, I'll stop right there and respond because you've got a long meeting. But we think it's an appropriate thing, and I think the Plan Commission did also.
Great. Any questions, Mr. Byers? Seeing none, thank you very much. See you in a few weeks. Moving right along, new ordinance 16-05-18. Council to consider ordinance 16-05-18, an ordinance for text amendments to section 32.12 of the city's code of ordinances, council's rules of procedures.
Motion to introduce.
Second.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lees.
Good evening. If you will recall back when in early 2016 when we all took office and I started poking around in our city code and found out that the administrative section, the section dealing with council, was pretty outdated. We didn't even have the right time for our meeting in there. It hadn't been changed since 1983, I think. So did a quick revision. We've had a couple years now, got some more knowledge under our belt. I've hired an attorney to help with some more revisions to that section of the code, and it turned out to be a bigger project than we thought, but there have been some suggestions for rules changes that have come up in the last year that we wanted to go ahead and get this in, most notably succession. If the president for some reason should have to step down from the council, that the vice president would then succeed to that position. Another notable one that I've heard about lately is that roll call votes be rotated in their order, so we've put that in. Few other little parliamentary things for clarification, and I hope it will help. If not, I'm willing to entertain whatever you have suggestions about.
No questions, Ms. Lees?
I'd like to thank Ms. Lees for going to the extent and giving us some easy reading too. And I do appreciate the roll call change. I've never felt like it was a fair opportunity that everybody didn't get the first opportunity to vote at least once in a while. Like I say, I think all the changes that I looked at were good and needed. So I'm not sure about the vice president taking over for the president.
That'd be great. Additional questions or comments? Mr. Hampton?
On that roll call again, how will you determine? You just randomly?
Well, I wrote it in, and it took a little thought to think how to do it. The first one would be done alphabetically, probably to call the roll at the beginning of the meeting. The next one would start, in this case, alphabetically. Next one would start with Mr. Boyce and circle around, still alphabetically, but starting with a different person each time, so that it doesn't get too confusing for me, frankly.
Yeah, I would imagine.
It's a lot to keep up with.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Additional questions? See none? Thanks, Ms. Lees. Appreciate it. Moving on. New ordinance 17-05-18. Council to consider ordinance 17-05-18, an ordinance concerning park improvements to the issuance and sale of bonds and other matters connected therewith.
Motion to introduce.
Second.
Thank you very much, Mr. Howard.
This ordinance is your last approval of the park project to bring you up to date. Back in April of this year, you appropriated funds from existing funds from the PILOS agreements, from Park Capital Fund, and from impact fees totaling $2,232,506. The agreed upon budget included a bond issue in the total amount of $7,500,000. We've been working with O.W. Crone, Jim Treat, with Jeff Spalding, and we had our rating call with Standard & Poor's. Our AA rating was affirmed, which is pretty good for an organization our size, and compliments to the council for their fiscal responsibility. That's how you get those bond ratings, by having cash balances, good plans, and good budgets. This ordinance is the final approval authorizing the issuance of the bonds. Again, the bonds are issued in the name of the Park District, but since you are putting the levy behind the payment of these bonds, it is before you. Our present schedule is to sell bonds on May 31st with a award of bids and closing in the second week of June. And I'll stop and answer any questions.
No questions from Mr. Howard?
And
I just have one.
The working group would appreciate it. If you want to wait 2 weeks, that's fine, but we would like to fill in the blanks on all the closing documents if you're so inclined to move forward this evening.
Hampton?
Just one, because, and it's way down in the weeds here. When we were in the Finance Committee talking about the pickleball lights and stuff, lighting was going to be put back in the budget to be able to light those structures. In the description of projects, lighting is not mentioned, but I assume it's part of it. That's why I said it's probably in the weeds. But the only reason why I bring it up is because it became a point of discussion during the Finance Committee.
That's a Mr. Bennett question, and that might be a reason not to do it. I do know, this description is pretty generic.
Yeah,
so my guess is if you told him to put lights in the project, he did put them in the lights in the project. I do want to tell you that the bids were not, there were some add alternates and there were some deduction alternates, and the deduction alternates had to be approved to fit within the budget, and they're working and trying to rework some of that with the low bidder, who's Myers, and they're great to work with. But the bid climate is not good. In Mr. Ayers' road report, he stated that the Logan Street Bridge was to be bid next week. It was bid yesterday. Budget was $3.2 million. The low bidder was $4.4, and the next guy was $5.4. Subcontractors can't get help. They don't have enough workforce. And so the bid government center, of course, that expansion was postponed. So it's pretty tough out there. But Brandon and his group didn't have a good day Wednesday afternoon, but they're working their way out of it. So bring you up to speed.
Additional question, Mr. Boyce.
I would make the motion to waive the rules and pass this ordinance number 170518 on first reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? 8-0. With that, is there a motion to approve?
I would make a motion that we approve new ordinance 17-05-18.
Second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Clerk will call the roll.
If you would have passed mine on first reading, I could have done it.
I was discussing just so you know, I was making a motion, but somebody kind of kept going.
You gotta ask, Evelyn. You can't be shy.
It's their roll call.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, I couldn't pass that one.
My fault. My fault.
Mr. Air.
I wanted you to pass it. So that next week I would get to reprieve. Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor. Oh, he's not here. Ms. Rowland. Aye. Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
8-0. The ordinance is adopted.
Thank you very much, and
Thank
hopefully sometime this summer we'll have a groundbreaking.
Nice.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Moving on, miscellaneous number 1, council to consider resolution RC-08-18, a resolution authorizing the investment of public funds pursuant to Indiana Code 5-13-9-5. Mr. Spalding, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the council. Jeff Spalding, City Controller. The item before you is really rather perfunctory because we've gone through a series of decisions about options that are available to us for the investment of public funds and have gone through the issues and the rationale. And there's a couple choices that are available to local fiscal bodies if they choose to, within state law, to avail themselves to opportunities to earn a little bit higher interest rate by exercising some of these choices. One of those choices is to allow the community to invest cash balances in any bank across the state as opposed to only banks in your local community. But to do that, the council has to pass a resolution allowing that to happen. This council's done that in the past. And then you just recently did it last year in June. And what you did at that point in time, there's another companion resolution, which I won't go into, but we decided at that time to get these all on the same cycle so that they would expire on March 1st. And one is on a 4-year term, the other one's on a 2-year term, but we wanted to get them both expiring on March 1st. So what this does, it takes that resolution that was adopted in June last year, we set it to expire March 1st, 2018, so that the next time it expired, which is here, will be March 1st, 2020, and then these two resolutions dealing with the investment of funds will be aligned, and you will see them every 2 or 4 years with the same expiration date, and trying to streamline and simplify. So that's what's going on specifically with the resolution and all the timing, and I'll answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Spalding. Questions for Mr. Spalding? Comments? Seeing none.
Mr. President.
Ms. Wiles.
I would make a motion that we approve miscellaneous item number 1, resolution number RC-08-18.
Second that.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? 8-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to miscellaneous number 2. Council to consider resolution RC-9-18, an amendment to confirmatory resolution RC-1817, designating an economic revitalization area for GLC Noblesville Oleo LLC. Mr. Howard.
Another item brought to you by lack of workforce and delay in construction. When the GLC is the company that's building and leasing back to Borg Warner the project that we worked real hard on last year and the year before. We passed an abatement resolution for 100% of the assessed value for the first year of full assessment, and the resolution was written that 100% would apply to the assessment January 1st of 2018 for taxes payable in 19. On January 1st, the building was only about 40% assessed, and I put the property record card in. The projected cost was originally about $15 million. You can see there's a little over $5 million assessed value in the building. The purpose, GLC called and they said, you know, we were really counting on a year's taxes. So what this resolution does is amend sections 9 and 10 of the previous ordinance. So instead of 100% of 100% in the first year, it's 100% of 40% in the first year, and then 60% of the full assessment in the next year, basically making it revenue neutral. So that's the sum and substance of it. They approached the Administration of Economic Development, and they said, can we do that? And I said, well, it's not that simple, but we did get it written down. It's one of those things you have in your head, but how do you write it? So with that, I'll answer any questions.
I have a question. In your memo, it says because the building was only 40% assessed on January 1st, 2019.
That's 2018,
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
Okay, I'm not a tax
There you go. For taxes payable in 19.
That makes sense. Okay, I just want to make
Okay.
sure I was on the right page. Perfect, I understand. Additional questions?
Good catch.
Thank you. Getting smarter as the night goes on, just in time.
Just in time for adjournment.
Exactly. Any other questions, Mr. Howard? Trying to keep it light. All right. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. President,
Ms. Wiles.
I'd make a motion that we approve miscellaneous item number 2, a resolution RC-9-18, amending confirmatory resolution RC-18.
Thank you.
Second.
It's been moved in second. All those in favor? 8-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we close, the last item on the agenda is council comments. I would just say congratulations to those who were running in last week's election and those who supported those and those who administered the election. I know there were some new features with pads that Kathy Richardson lobbied hard to get. It sounded like it helped the process. It's always great to see democracy in action. So, additional comments?
I just have one, Mr. President. Just a point of congratulations. Yesterday, the Council on Alcohol and Other Drugs, Hamilton County Council, came together with the Hamilton County Commissioners, and they have their Youth Service Award every year. And I bring this up because Mary Blake Brock from Noblesville High School won the award. So congratulations to Mary Blake Brock for winning the Youth Service Award yesterday from the Hamilton County Commissioners. She is the Noblesville High School, I think, class president, senior class president. So congrats to her.
Additional comments? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Moved and second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Good evening. Thank you.